Okay, should be good.
Awesome. Thank you, Colleen. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jordan Rawlings. I am the accessibility team lead here at Pilot Digital. I am an International Accessibility Association certified professional in core competencies. So that's why I'm coming to you today with a little bit more on some web accessibility you might have been hearing about with WCAG 2.1 requirements for, in particular, some government organizations and health care organizations, but the swath of people that this applies to is actually pretty wide. So wherever you're from in that swath, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. For those of you who are joining us via audio, I am a white person in their 30s. I've got short, kind of chin length hair. It's brown with lighter colored bangs. I'm here in a button-up shirt with some little flower patterns on it. I'll just go over some of those quick little welcome things that Colleen touched on already, but for those of you who are just now joining us, a couple housekeeping things. Captions are available in Google Meet if you would like them. You can click the bottom of the screen. There's a button that looks like this. It has CC on it. So you can click that. You can hit Shift and C at the same time on your keyboard if you would like captions. These slides that we're going to show you are available if you would like to look them over yourself. You can email us at accessibility@pilotdigital.com. We would be happy to send those over. Like Colleen said, if you have any questions, we will have some time at the end to address those. Just send them through the Google Meet chat. The button for that looks like this. It's this little speech bubble with some lines. Just pop them right in there and we will get to as many as we can. This webinar is being recorded right now. We'll send it out to you who are attending. It'll also be available on YouTube where it will also have captions. I believe that that is all of the housekeeping things. So let's get started. First of all, just want to say thank you for being here today. Thank you for making time for accessibility and for helping make the internet a better place. It's important work and we're really glad that you're here. Today, we're going to cover what you need to know about some of these upcoming accessibility deadlines you might have heard about based on the final rules that came out from the Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services here in the US that came out in 2024. We're going to get into the WCAG or WCAG standards that these rules reference. We'll go over. There's a lot of acronyms. Those of you who are coming from government agencies, I'm sure are used to that, but we will go into all of those. So we'll go over those WCAG standards and whether you are new to web accessibility or you are familiar with this and are already on your journey. We will give you some hopefully actionable places to start on getting compliant by some of those upcoming deadlines, whichever boat you're in, and as well, we'll finish up with some ways to integrate accessibility into your everyday processes and, as they say in the industry, shift left. Build that into your workflow so that you don't have to scramble to meet deadlines and can incorporate accessibility into everything that you do. Disclaimer before we jump in, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but the good news is you don't have to be a lawyer or IAAP certified or an assistive technology expert to make your site more accessible. There are tons of things that you can do today with a basic grasp of editing a website, and we will jump into those. So the first thing is we will talk a little bit more about these final rules that are setting some deadlines for compliance to these web accessibility standards. And we have a fun little chart. So there's been a lot of news about this WCAG deadline, but to get the full picture of everyone that's affected, because it's a lot of people, it's important to know that there are actually two separate rules at play. There's the Department of Justice final rule, which was published in April of 2024, and then the Department of Health and Human Services final rule, which came out a month later. So a few differences to note between these. The DOJ final rule is in reference to the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically Title II of that law, whereas the Health and Human Services final rule is in reference to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. There are differences in who these rules apply to because of that, but together they cover a huge swath of organizations. The DOJ rule applies to state and local government agencies, such as agencies that provide benefits, social services, public schools, community colleges, public universities, police departments, courts, public hospitals, parks and rec programs, public libraries, transit agencies, and many, many more. The HHS rule applies to any program, service, or organization that receives funding from the HHS. So if you get Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, child welfare programs, clinical research, any of those, you are beholden to this final rule from the HHS. Just have a little drink of water here. One other difference to note is that there's a slight difference in how the deadlines are applied. The DOJ rule is based on the population of the area that your agency serves. If the population is more than 50,000 people, your deadline's coming up really quick here in the end of this April, versus if you serve less than that, your deadline is April of next year. For the HHS rule, that is based on the number of employees your organization has. And I believe that it is more than 15. You are required to be compliant in May of this year. So again, coming up pretty quick. And if you have less than that, then you have another year to get compliant because it is somewhat of a lift. What else do we have here? Another thing to note, the DOJ rule is specific to web accessibility. I'm just putting standards in place for web accessibility. Specifically, the HHS rule actually has a lot of other accessibility guidelines to other services. But what's important to note is that the web accessibility portion of the HHS rule very, very closely aligns to the Department of Justice rule that came out. Those both require conformance to WCAG level 2.1 conformance AA. We'll talk about more about what that means. They apply to web content and mobile apps. Web content is a wide swath of stuff as well. It's pretty much anything that makes up the information and sensory experience users receive from your digital presence. Any web page, interface, or digital document that a user would need to understand, apply for, or access your services. So that's your website, that's mobile apps, that's patient interfaces, all of those things. These rules both have a few exceptions to what is required to be compliant. Some archived web content, pre-existing electronic documents that are not currently used or necessary, third-party content that you can't control, like forum posts, things like that. Individualized password-protected documents for users who don't have accessibility needs, and some pre-existing social media posts. But again, those exceptions are pretty limited. So in this case, kind of better safe than sorry when it comes to making your website accessible. If you are not a government or healthcare entity, you might be asking, do I have to follow these rules? Is this relevant to me? If you are a business that provides goods and services to the public, which is most businesses, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, still applies to you. Under Title III, you're still required to be accessible if you're a public business. These DOJ and HHS rules are addendums that are giving specifics on what web accessibility means. However, legal precedent has already established that your website as a public business counts as public space with the same accessibility requirements, requirement to be accessible as your brick and mortar space. And legal precedent has also established that when your website is not accessible, these WCAG standards at the AA level are the most commonly referenced path to conformance. Courts will say, yes, your website is not accessible. Here's what you have to do to fix it, is usually in reference. They usually reference these rules. So they're important to know across the board. We're mostly referencing the same sort of set of guidelines. You may have also heard that these DOJ and HHS rules are under review. First, the rule is the rule until it isn't. And even if these rules are repealed, the legal requirement for accessibility remains under the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act, even if the specifications for that accessibility aren't regulated by these rules, the expectation is still there. As well, state and local laws still apply. Like, for example, here in Illinois, we have the IITAA, that's the Illinois Information Technology Accessibility Act. That applies to state agencies and universities, requires them to meet, again, WCAG 2.1 AA standards. This has been in effect since 2024, so this is not new. And these are very common standards across the board. This is kind of your point of reference. Many other states have their own web accessibility laws, and even if you're in a state that doesn't, people are probably accessing your website, especially if you're a business, from more than one state. So yeah, if you're a state or local government agency, healthcare organization, school, college, public business, this is for you. Whatever laws apply to you, WCAG 2.1 AA is your best bet. And I keep saying WCAG, so let's jump into that, talk about what that means. WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So yes, saying WCAG guidelines is a little redundant. Bear with me. These are published by an organization called WC3. That is the World Wide Web Consortium. It is a non-governmental organization of tech experts who are pooling their expertise to create standards across a lot of internet functionality to kind of standardize the internet, make it work better and more predictably for everybody. Web accessibility is just a portion of what they do, but they've been doing it for a while. They started with version 1.0 of these guidelines in 1999. So it's been around for a while. Since then, again, WC3 is not a government organization. These aren't laws, but since they have started publishing them, many laws around the world have been based on these guidelines. Version 2.0 came out in 2008, and version 2.1, which we're talking about now, came out in 2018. They actually have published another one since then. 2.2 came out in 2023, I believe, and version 3 is in progress. So these are kind of constantly evolving to keep up with the state of the internet and the state of technology. But 2.1, pardon me, has been published long enough that we know that it works, and we know that people have access to these rules. It's nothing new we're springing on people, really. Talking about AA, that is the level of conformance, you'll hear it called. So these WCAG guidelines have 3 levels of conformance. It's helpful to think about these as priority levels. Level A is basic, bare bones functionality. Level AA is standard. There are a few more success criteria, a few more requirements than the level below. But if you are conformant to level AA, you are conformant to level A. They build on each other. AAA is considered the highest level. That's above and beyond. W3C doesn't actually recommend that as a standard usually, because it usually requires sites to be designed with accessibility as a priority from the very beginning. It takes a huge amount of resources and usually money and time to sort of retrofit a site into those. So that's why we are at level AA. So after all of that, the most important thing to know about these WCAG standards is that WCAG standards from 2.0 to now are backwards compatible. So if you're already 2.0 compliant, there are a few more success criteria to consider, but most of your heavy lifting is done. Later on, we'll take a look at those and look at a few of those that you can fix right now if you have even a basic familiarity with editing content on your site. If you're not yet 2.0 compliant, we'll go over some really simple high-impact fixes that will address some of the most common issues disabled users run into, and many of these are also things you can do on your own without developer help. So either way, hopefully you'll be able to come away from this webinar with at least one thing you can do yourself today to make your site easier to use. Where should I start? We'll start from the very beginning, which, as we all know from The Sound of Music, is a very good place to start. If you are just beginning your accessibility journey, before jumping into fixing your site, we do recommend a site audit in some form to get a look at what's going on. There's some great free tools out there, like Site Improve, Axe, Dev Tools from DQ, Wave. A lot of these are free. They're very easy to use. Optimally, you would also be able to conduct a manual audit, which is checking pages by hand, taking a look at them with human eyes and also with assistive technologies, because there are lots of things that these automated tools don't catch or don't have the context of the page to understand what's happening and if there is an accessibility issue or not. But any of these free tools will be able to give you a direction to start with, and starting is the most important part. So if you are starting from scratch, here are 5 of the most common accessibility issues we see reported by disabled users in audits, in ADA lawsuits, kind of across the board. Those are missing or incorrect alt text, color contrast failures, issues with forms on your site, and a few different things to look out for when it comes to links. So we'll start with alt text. Alt text, or an alt description, alternative text, is a short, usually less than 150 character description of an image that is sort of programmed in via HTML or your site platform's media library, however that functions. That is read aloud by screen reader technology for blind and low vision users who rely on that. It also often shows up if, for example, you have a bad internet connection and images won't load. You can see the alt text to see what would have been there. Lots of things you'll find in web accessibility benefit a lot of other users as well. But most importantly, that is for screen reader technology. It is required for functional or informative images, but it is best practice to leave it empty for decorative images. So good news, if you're starting from scratch and you're going, there's 1,000 photos on my site, what am I gonna do? You don't have to add alt text to them all. In fact, please don't add alt text to them all. If there are images that have alt text that don't need it, it really slows down the experience when you're navigating by a screen reader. So with that, you might be asking, what is a functional versus a decorative image? Functional images or informative images do exactly what they say on the tin. They provide information or context that's needed to understand the content of a page. That can be logos, references, images, charts, buttons, links, icons. Almost any image that contains text is considered functional, versus, on the other hand, decorative images like style elements, border spacers, images that accompany a text link, or things like stock photos that are just there for vibes. Those should not have alt text. Images that are described by text nearby on the same page as to where they're located also shouldn't have alt text. For example, if you have an event going on and you've made a little graphic with all of the event details, if you have that on your site as an image, but then next to it is, the plain text, all of the same information, that image, even though it has text, would not need alt text. So that's kind of the only exception to images with text in them not needing alt text. Otherwise, they almost always do. Just to get you a little more familiar with this concept, we're going to play a game. I'm going to show you an image, and you're going to guess. You can use the chat if it is functional or decorative. So here's the photo. This is a picture of my cat, Lou. He's a silver tabby with 3 legs. He's missing his front paw, and he's sitting on top of my fridge. So what do we think? Is this decorative or functional? What are we thinking? We're seeing functional. Okay, thanks, Philip. What do we got? Anyone else? Okay, all right. So great. The answer is, I'm sorry, Phil, it was a trick question. It depends. It's most important, I do this because I want you to remember, it's most important to remember that the function of an image or the lack thereof is dependent on the context of the page. So if I had this photo alongside my bio on an about page on a website, it would be decorative. However, if I was leaving a list of instructions to my cat sitter and I said, if you can't find Lou, check his favorite place, it would be important to have a description for that. So overall, with alt text, when you're determining which images need that or not, just ask yourself, what information would be missing from the page if this wasn't there? Delete the image, read it, see if you still get it. And then, if that information is necessary, add your alt text. That's pretty easy to do usually if your website has any kind of, CRM image media library. So our next common issue we're going to take a look at is color contrast. So in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, they set requirements for the ratio of contrast between two colors used on top of each other. That's usually like text color on a background color. There are slightly different standards for normal text or large text. Large text is considered either 14-point bold and up or 18-point regular, as well as they have some color contrast recommendations for graphics as well, which is any non-text thing a user needs to see what's going on a page. That's like the outlines around form fields, that's favorite buttons, that's things like that. We have 4.5 to 1 for normal text, 3.1 for large text, and those graphic elements. Some of those graphic elements, the requirement for color contrast on those is actually new to 2.1. So if you are just addressing this now, you can get it all in one fell swoop. To check and see what the color contrast is for your elements, we love this color contrast checker from WebAIM. And here is a look at what that interface looks like. Here we have a screenshot on the right. There are two fields. You can put your two hex values of the colors you want to check in there. It will tell you what the contrast ratio is. And then right below it has a really helpful breakdown of what that color combination looks like in normal text, in large text. If it's passing color contrast ratio expectations on both AA and AAA levels. There's also these lightness sliders below each hex value input area, so you can adjust the lightness or the darkness. If you don't have a conformant color combination, you can sort of play with it and get it into a zone that does contrast correctly. We love this tool, highly recommend. They're not paying us to say this, we just think that they're neat. And that's color contrast. The next common issue that we have are form issues. There are actually a number of common form issues that we see. Some of them are a little more intensive to fix, but if you're using a form plugin on a site builder like WordPress, an easy thing to fix are misused form field placeholders. So what a placeholder is in this screenshot we have of the, looks like phone number field on a form. You have the text input box itself, and then in sort of grayed out letters, it has an example of what that input should be. In this case, it's the format of the number. It has the area code in parentheses, and then it's 555-555. You may think that this is helpful, gives users communicates the format you expect responses to be, but there are a few issues with the way that the placeholder text is being used here that disabled users run into. First, placeholder text might be available to screen readers. So if you are using that format for format information, that might not be visible. If you are using that as a form label in and of itself without a label above the box, that might not be visible at all. And then people who are using screen readers would have no idea what to put in that field. Even if you are seeing this box, even if you do have the label above it, if you need this placeholder text to communicate something people can't see otherwise, the text disappears when you start typing with most of these. So as soon as you start typing, you don't have that info anymore. This is especially bad for users with cognitive disabilities. Overall, you can see this is a lot of issues, so we don't recommend it. To correct this issue, use the form labels that live above the input box so they remain visible and perceivable to all users. Many form builders have an option to add directions for their information, like this formatting example, as a note below or to the side of the input boxes. Placeholder text in and of itself isn't bad. It's good to provide information to users through multiple different channels. If you have that example in the text box as the placeholder text and below it or above it, for example. But the reason that it's helpful to do that is because sometimes people can't access one of those channels of information, so we need multiple. And if you're using a form builder, this is a really easy fix. You can go in and use their baked-in label settings to program this. All right, our next common issue is with links. Again, there are a ton of issues you can run into with links. You want your link styling to be consistent, color contrast compliant. We want it to convey information without solely relying on color. You want your link to describe what it links to without relying on other elements on the page. You want to make sure your link text is consistent across the page, and you don't want to use full URLs as link text. The first three on that list might not be something that you can fix in one afternoon. A lot of those things might be on the style level. You might have to get someone to go in and edit your CSS or what have you. But the last three there, those are easier to fix on your own. So we'll jump into those. So the first one, a good link describes what the text links to without relying on other page elements. So this is mostly regarding text links. We have an example of this on the page. It's a screenshot from an edited version for this example post that we have on our blog. Many users who use screen readers navigate a page by scrolling through and getting the headers and getting the links instead of having the screen reader read every single word out loud to get to where you want to in the page. That can be tedious. So headers and links are a common way to navigate more quickly. So we have a screenshot from our blog with a paragraph from this blog post, but we only have the header and the links visible to give you an idea of what that experience is like if you're not familiar with using a screen reader. The header of this section is WCAG versions are backwards compatible. And then the two links are see what's new and see our list. That doesn't give us a whole lot of information on what those links go to. What's new, you might be able to guess that that's with WCAG, but maybe not. See our list could be a list of anything. Here is a better example where the text that is linked gives us a little bit more context. Well, first I'm going to give you the original context. Here's the rest of the paragraph. The first link is in a sentence that says, if that's the case for you, if your site meets WCAG 2.0 already, see what's new in WCAG 2.1. And then the following link is in the sentence, if you're not yet up to date with previous WCAG versions, see our list of the most common pitfalls and errors that you can quickly address. So here's a better example now that we kind of know where we're coming from. Again, we can see the same header. WCAG versions are backwards compatible, which gives us a little bit of context. But now our two links are what's new in WCAG 2.1 and see our list of the most common web accessibility pitfalls. If you were just scrolling through this page, looking at the links, you'd have a much better idea of what those link to. It makes your website way easier to navigate with a screen reader. Again, here is that paragraph content in the same sentences as before. Our next slide is another thing you want to look out for good links. Have consistent link text, and that works both ways. You want text that is the same to link to the same place. You want text that is different to link to different places. Here is a bad example of this. I'm not going to say what site that this is from because I'm not here to dunk on anybody, but This is a screenshot from a blog. There are 3 images for 3 different blog posts. One is named Our Top 10 Plant Care Tips. The other is named How Often and How Much You Should Water Your Houseplants. The third is titled How to Repot Your Houseplant. There are links below these. You can see here circled. They all say read more. This is a bad example because it is the same text that links to 3 different places. Again, that makes it really hard to navigate if you're just looking at the link text, if you don't have the context of the rest of the page. On the flip side, you want text that is the same. Like, for example, if you had a link that said book now on your homepage of your website, you want those all to link to the same place. If 2 of them link to your booking page and the other links to your contact page, similarly confusing to navigate. Our last sort of link check is don't use a full URL as link text. I have an example of this. Here is a screenshot of an email from me. It says, hey team, here's a link to the webinar notes for tomorrow. I just pasted the Google Doc link in there. It's long and unwieldy. And if you are using a screen reader, here's what that sounds like.
https://docsgoogle.com/d/1jcU6P9DSISLD_USCF/YSF/JTWNRJAHLX7WZLYDWHFXY/edit
That was 16 seconds. So we don't want to do that. If you have links that you're not sure what to use as the text besides the URL itself, relying on those rules of just make sure it's something descriptive that gives people an idea of where it goes and is not used for a different link, and you should be pretty good to go. So those are some of our main takeaways if you are just starting your web accessibility journey. Those are a few things that you can take a look on your site today and probably fix. You can probably find a few of them. For those of you who are already compliant with WCAG 2.0, we will take a look at what's new in WCAG 2.1. And I'm going to go quickly because I think I have about 15 minutes left before we want to take questions. So there are 12 new A and AA level criteria in WCAG 2.1. Here's a list of all of those. Here's a list of all of those. We're not going to talk about all of them because, like some of the issues with 2.0, some of those are easy to handle on your own. Some of them might require dev help or more structural changes, like changes to your style guide. We don't need to get into all of that today. So we're just going to focus on a couple of these that are easier to look for, that are easier to fix in an afternoon on a beautiful Thursday. Well, it's really great here in Chicago. Hopefully it's beautiful wherever you are Thursday afternoon. The 4 that we are going to look at are pointer gestures and label in name. Those are both A level, and the 2 AA level criteria we're going to look at are identify input purpose and non-text contrast. If you've been paying attention so far, you can probably guess what non-text contrast is, but we'll get to it. So the first we're going to take a look at is pointer gestures. The short version of this is this rule is mostly in reference to touchscreen interfaces. For multi-point or path-based gestures, you want to make sure that those can operate with a single pointer and without a path-based gesture. For example, a multi-point gesture. Imagine if you're looking at a map, like on a tablet or something, and you want to zoom in or out. You have to use 2 fingers. If you just do this, you're going to scroll up or down. So that's an example of a multi-point gesture. A path-based gesture might be something where you have to take an object and drag it in a relatively straight path. This is common in some sort of CAPTCHA type I am not a robot tests where you have to drag a piece directly across. This doesn't apply to traditional drag and drop functions because that doesn't necessarily have to be in a straight line. You can, click on your file and write your name in cursive with it before you drop it in the trash. So that's not about this, but we're just talking about multi-point or path-based gestures. For those, you just want to make sure that they're alternate methods of doing those. You want to make sure that there are options that don't require multiple touches, that don't require dragging in a straight line. I have an example of that below. This is an example of someone doing it well. This is a screenshot from a map on a page of one of my favorite donut shops in Chicago, Downstate Donuts. Again, they don't pay us to say that. I just think they're neat. We have the map embed from Google Maps that has their location on it. It says, this is a screenshot from a Mac, so there's a title on it that says use command and scroll to zoom the map. But on the right side down at the bottom, you also have plus or minus, zoom in or zoom out buttons. So if you can't hit multiple keys at once, if you can't use two fingers at once, you can click or use a sip and puff or use a stylus or however you are navigating to click that in and out button. That is an example of a multi-type gesture with an alternative option. You also see this in sliders sometimes. You might have to click and drag a slider to see what's next on it. That's when we want to make sure that there are also buttons on either side of it so that you can just click it and go next or go back. There's another example of some of the most common multi-point or path-based gestures you might run into. A lot of these are going to be in the settings of whatever plugin or app you're using to put those on your site. We most commonly use WordPress, so if you have a WordPress slider, most of them have settings to add those extra features. So that's something you can take a look at. Our next criteria is label in name. This one gets a little bit more complicated. You do have to right click and open the inspect function in your browser. Bear with me, I believe in you. The short version of this rule is that for interface components with labels, so anything that a user interacts with on your site that has a label, that includes text or images of text, the name of it that is encoded, that is in the HTML, matches the text that is visible as the label. So an example of this is we have below a screenshot of an email field in a form. It says email, there's a little dot by it so you know it's required. There's the form field below. On the left here, I have a screenshot of that, and below in my dark mode browser, you can see what the code for that section looks like. And you can see I have that email label, the visible label is highlighted. And in the back end, there's a label coded that says email. For example, if one of those said email and the other one said address, that might be hard to parse for a lot of assistive technology. It relies on not what is on the page visually, but what is in the code to read what is on a page, to parse what is on a page. So if those things match, it's easier to use assistive technology. This is particularly useful for people who use speech navigation. If they say, go to the address bar, if it's not programmed correctly, your technology is not going to know what that is. So we just want to make sure that that matches before you go, oh God, that involves code. What's happening? Which is how I felt when I was first trying to figure this all out. The easiest way to do this, you can highlight the label on whatever you're looking at, right click, open up your inspector. You can see if there's a label like pictured here. Don't worry about changing that. Just go into your form builder, change the name in the form. It's not difficult, I promise. I promise you can do it. So that is label in name. Our next new criteria we're going to look at is identify input purpose. This is another one about form fields. Like we mentioned earlier, forms can be problems, but forms, there are some easy ways to make forms a lot more accessible. It's just a place you definitely want to look out for. Here's another thing to look out for with your forms. For applicable form fields, ensure that the input value can be programmatically determined. Programmatically determined is a phrase that you will see pop up a lot in these WCAG guidelines. It means essentially what we were talking about on the last slide, that the information that is necessary is somewhere in the code, is somewhere in the HTML, is somewhere in that backend, because that is the information that most assistive technologies, especially like screen readers, are using to parse and communicate what's on the page. So for applicable form fields, ensure that the input value can be programmatically determined. This helps autofill and other assistive technologies understand the expected input. If anyone here has ever used autofill before, I know I have. It's way too easy to online shop. This is basically that functionality. The people who developed these standards, W3C, there are groups that have developed what they call standard input purposes. And these are standardized ideas or formats for common information in forms. And that makes it possible to use autofill across different forms, whether your form says name, whether your form is in French and it says nom, whether your form says first and last name or first name. If we are using those standard input purposes, that information of what it's actually looking for is in the back end, able to be communicated by assistive technology like autofill. So the way to do that is, again, in your form builder. Most form builders have this functionality somewhat built in. The way to take a look for this is to use the standard form fields whenever you can. So, for example, here at Pilot, we use gravity forms quite a bit. If you go in and build a form, you can sort of just click on different things you want to add to it. There's a button you can click that says name. It adds the name field to your form. Do that instead of creating a short text input field and naming it name. Because if you use the pre-built ones, the standard input is already built into it. So that's just a thing to know moving forward as you're building forms, to use these built-in options whenever you can, because they have all of this programming in them already. You don't have to worry about it. That's identify input purpose. Our next one we've got is non-text contrast. Again, if you've been, we're jumping ahead a little bit. Sorry about that. Non-text contrast. In short, user interface components like checkboxes or favorite buttons or other graphical objects that convey important information should have at least a 3.1 color contrast ratio. If you've been with us so far for the last 44 minutes, this is probably pretty familiar to you already. It just means that it makes not just text, but other important information that's communicated in other ways besides words available to people who have visual disabilities, who are colorblind, who are low vision. Here's an example of that. This is a screenshot from the online store from King Arthur Flour. I know there's some people in this room who are familiar with this website. I am a baker myself as well in my free time. And here's just a screenshot from their shop. I'm going to point out here we have a product tile for King Arthur sheet pan. It's got great reviews. It looks like it's between $22.95 and $32.95, depending on your options. But up here on the tile, we have in the top right corner, there's a heart. It's a favorite button. We can see that there is a decent contrast. It's pretty small in the screenshot, but the product tile is white. The heart is a nice, rich red. So there's plenty of contrast. So users can tell that's how I favorite an item. That is an interface that's important to know to get the full site functionality here, to use their favorites interface. So we want to make sure that not just text, but anything else a user needs to know to access and experience your site has similar contrast, color contrast requirements to what we expect of text and other information. And I'm sneaking a peek at my next slide. And I think that that is it for our most important 2.1 highlights. So if you are already 2.0 compliant, those 12 new success criteria are worth taking a look at in the next month. Some of them may require a little bit more help, but those are a couple of things that you can probably take a look for right now. Next up, this is for everybody. We're going to discuss some sustainable accessibility strategies. These are just ways to build accessibility into everything that you do so that your processes are more equitable and more accessible, so that your site is accessible consistently, even when you add new content, not just when you do an audit every couple of years because some new deadline has come out. This sounds like more work, you're adding more to your workflow, but it actually lessens your workflow because it's baked in. You don't have to do something and then go back and redo it. In the industry, in accessibility, like I mentioned earlier, this is called shifting left. It's in reference to like the general timeline of like building a website. You start from like the concept and the design, and you do iterations of that, and then you code it, and then you test it. And then it's live, and this new rule comes out, and you have to go back and test everything. With shifting left, with building these strategies in and considering them from the top, you don't have to go back and redo everything. You just start from the beginning and say, as we're developing color palettes, are they accessible? As we're testing this website, do our personas that we are testing these from include not just like our market demographics, but our area demographics, our community demographics? Do they include people with disabilities? So that's shifting left. I could talk about that in a whole nother webinar, but we'll go over some touch points and things to inspire you to keep thinking on this and build it into your workflow and your work, whatever that might be. So here we go. First one, we touched on this a little bit with some of these sort of style or system level issues you might see. Identifying sources of common failures. If you're going through your site audit and you're seeing consistently, we have a ton of color contrast failures, but it's the same color scheme or color schemes on every page. If you go back and you, instead of just fixing it page by page, you say, oh, well, there's a color contrast issue with our branding colors. Let's redo that. And then you give yourself not just a tool to fix that, but a tool to create accessible visual content moving forward. So if you look at those common failures and address those at the root, you're gonna hit a lot of birds with one stone. So when you first do your audit, this is a thing to look out for. You might also find issues that are in page templates as a place where they show up. So instead of having to go back and change something page by page, you change it in the template and then it's done. So step one, as you're auditing, keep an eye out for repeated issues, sources of common failures. Step two, this goes, not steps. You don't have to do these in any given order. This is whatever works for your workflow. Number two, audit your site regularly. Don't rely on AI tools or overlays. Overlays are also a whole nother webinar, but not only have they shown in legal precedent that they can't protect you from legal consequences, they have like overwhelmingly and consistently been decried by the disabled community, who repeatedly say this doesn't work with our assistive technology. It's trying to do what I already have assistive technology to do on every other website, and your overlay is impeding it. It's not providing the tools that I need. Don't rely on overlays. Just don't. If that's anything you take away from this webinar, don't use overlays. There are also some new AI tools that are coming out, especially in terms of accessibility monitoring. Those are still coming out. So we're still continuing to see them grow in capability and see what they can do. So I'm not going to say across the board, don't use them. But again, like I touched on with automated free audit tools versus manual audits, so much of what accessibility is context dependent. Like, you know, when we're talking about alt text, is this image functional or decorative? An AI tool, a free audit tool can't determine that. An AI tool They say some of them are getting close to being able to give you an experience like using a screen reader, but they're not there yet. So don't rely on those, and then do keep on top of auditing your site regularly, especially when you add significant new content, just to stay ahead of it. And again, that can also be a place to identify common failures if they're coming up every time you create new content. That's another thing to look out for. Number 3, consider the people, not just the rules. This goes back to sort of what I touched on a little bit in shifting left, particularly when you are designing is the example. But if you are building a new service for clients or customers, if you are putting together a new checkout workflow, there are a lot of like user experience and QA testing processes that already exist for a lot of those things. When you are doing that, are you also looking for accessibility? Are you thinking, you know, which users are more likely to convert? What is it like to go through this process? What is it like for a user who's more likely to convert, who uses a puff and sip device to navigate a page? When you are considering the people and the experience of going through that, you're going to catch a lot more things, and they're going to be on a higher level than if you are just combing through looking for these little technical details. Considering the people with disabilities who are using their site and your experience, whether that's visual or auditory or cognitive or motor disabilities, which are kind of the main 4 that web accessibility is based on, but disability is a kaleidoscope of experience. But if you start by thinking, incorporating those personas into testing and development where you are already sort of considering personas, that is a great way to shift left. I note shifting left here in number 4, but the title of that is include the entire team. And that's actually a concept that I learned here at Pilot about open book management. I almost want to say marketing. That's not it. Open book management is actually a food service-based management strategy that involves talking to people at every level of your organization. This, in this context, is about financial decisions. The example that they give is they had a bunch of conversations amongst management about how to, spend less money on food and make more. Margins in food service are rough. Management kind of hemmed and hawed over it, and then they talked to a dishwasher, who most people think of as like the lowest rung on the culinary ladder. They talked to a dishwasher who says, I see every single night we give out these portions of fries and people are throwing half of them away. They're paying the same amount for this. We can give them what they want and they'll be happy and spend half as much on it if we put half as much fries on the plate. That's just an example. But examples for you could be talking to, if you're in a medical practice, the people at the front desk when they are registering clients, when they are interacting with people, trying to get information. What barriers are they running into? What barriers are your providers running into? What barriers across every level of your organization are you running into? These are important conversations to have as a whole company because these ideas can come from anywhere. And if you end up with a area where you're failing, and all it takes is talking to people and keeping that line of communication open. So talk to your whole team. And then the last thing I have for you, with 5 minutes left for questions, is be proactive with an accessibility statement. An accessibility statement is a page on your website that has a statement about your commitment to accessibility. Here are the things that you want to include. First, your why, your commitment, opening by saying, we are committed to accessibility. Here's why that's important to us. Here's why including disabled people is important to us. Welcoming people in is important. Number 2, the accessibility standards you're referencing, in this case, likely WCAG 2.1 AA. So people know you're transparent with your standards. You want to include any known issues or failures, things that are not accessible, things that have alternate access methods if it's impossible to make the original whatever it is accessible. Anything that's in progress that you're working on, include that. That can also include like education for your employees on disability. Those can all be included as well. And most importantly, a way to contact you for assistance if people are having trouble with your site. It removes a huge barrier to give them this option instead of having to try and navigate this inaccessible site to contact you, or they'll just leave and find something elsewhere, or worse, they'll say, I can't access the site and I can't contact anyone about it. I'll file a lawsuit. So those are the 5 elements of a good accessibility statement. And when it comes down to this ongoing accessibility as a whole, we'll leave you with this. Progress over perfection. Everything you do to make your site more accessible makes your site more accessible. That matters to somebody. That matters to somebody's real life experience. It also helps keep you compliant with these laws that are very much real. But the hardest thing to do is start. The most important thing to do is start. And hopefully this gives you, wherever you're at in your journey, a place to start today. Thank you all so much for being here. I know we only have a few minutes left, but let me check the chat. Do we have any questions? I'm not seeing any. Before we close this out, does anyone have anything else they'd like to drop in the chat? Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it very much. If we have no questions, I will give you your last 2 minutes back to you. But thank you again from myself, from the accessibility team, from everyone at Pilot for being here. If you have more questions that you think of later, please, please, please reach out. Obviously, I love talking about all this stuff. We have an accessibility team here to help you, and we would love to do so. So you can email me. I'm just Jordan at Pilot Digital, or our entire team, accessibility at Pilot. Many of you probably have Colleen's email address, colleen@pilotdigital.com. We would love to hear from all of you. So thank you so much. Have a great rest.